The warmth of summer was saying goodbye in silence, like someone who understands the right time to leave. The sky, once vibrant and full of golden promises, now painted itself in softer shades, orange, pink, and a shy line of blue still resisting on the horizon. The trees in the backyard swayed slowly, as if bowing to thank the long days they had lived. Each leaf seemed to hold a bit of sunlight inside, reluctant to let it go. Lucca watched everything through the window, his face resting in his hands, feeling the different air entering the room. It was no longer the hot wind of restless afternoons, but a new, almost shy breeze that carried with it the scent of change. Blue, lying at his feet, lifted his head for a moment, just enough to look at the boy before returning to rest. The dog seemed to understand that the moment asked for silence. It was the kind of silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from the presence of peace. Outside, the day was beginning to lose its haste. The song of the birds sounded more spaced. Time walked in shorter steps, and even the sun seemed to want to stay a little longer, just to say goodbye slowly. Lucca took a deep breath and felt something hard to explain, a mix of longing for what had been and curiosity for what was yet to come. Maybe that was what the end of summer always brought. The reminder that even the seasons know that rest is part of life. The air changed. It was as if the world had opened an invisible window, and through it came an ancient perfume, that scent only time knows how to blend. It smelled of wet earth, of freshly fallen leaves, of promises of rain that had not yet arrived. The wind passed lightly, bringing with it the sweet, melancholic aroma of days preparing to sleep. Lucca inhaled deeply, letting the new air fill his chest. There was something familiar there, something he couldn't name but recognized without needing to think. Blue, lying near the window, also lifted his nose and breathed, curious. His eyes narrowed, attentive, as if trying to understand what that scent was saying. And somehow, it seemed that the whole world was listening too. Outside, the yard was turning into a scene of calm. The flowers were beginning to lose their brightness, but gained a gentler tone, as if time caressed them before letting them go. The ground, covered with dry leaves, exhaled a warm fragrance, a mix of farewell and embrace. The distant sound of the trees blended with the scent, forming something that couldn't be seen but could be felt completely. Lucca closed his eyes. For a moment, he felt that the perfume came from somewhere inside him, and he understood. The smell of time is what remains of the things that pass but are never lost. Blue rested his head on his paws, content, and the whole room seemed to breathe with him, slow, deep, at peace. The first leaves began to fall. At first, it was just one or another, timid, detaching from the branches like someone saying goodbye in silence. But soon the ground was full of them, yellow, golden, reddish, forming a carpet that the wind insisted on rearranging. Each leaf seemed to have its own will, its own way of dancing. Lucca watched from the window, fascinated. The leaves didn't fall, they floated. They turned in the air, rose, descended, and spun before touching the ground. It was a choreography without rehearsal but perfect, the kind of beauty only chance knows how to create. Blue, curious, got up and went to the door, his ears alert to the sound of the wind playing outside. The boy opened the window a little, and a gust of air entered, bringing with it a light leaf that landed on his lap. He held it gently, admiring the thin veins running through it like secret paths. He ran his fingers over it slowly and noticed it still held the warmth of the sun, even after falling. He smiled at the thought. Maybe the things that leave take with them a bit of the place they came from. Outside, the wind blew once more, spreading new leaves across the yard. Lucca watched them move and had the impression that the wind was talking to them and that they answered, each in their own way. Blue barked softly, without alarm, as if agreeing. And in that instant, the boy understood that the ground can also be the sky when you learn to look slowly. Outside, the trees began to sing. It wasn't a song like that of birds, nor a sound made to be heard. It was deeper, older. The wind passed through branches and leaves, creating notes that changed with each breath. Sometimes it was low, like a distant sigh. Other times, high, like a soft laugh hidden among the treetops. Lucca leaned his face against the window, eyes half closed, just to listen better. That sound felt familiar, like a song he once knew but had forgotten. Blue sat beside the bed, his ears moving as the wind changed direction. It was curious how he seemed to understand too, not with the mind, but with the body. The wind crossed the yard, making the leaves dance again, and for a moment, the sound felt like a conversation between friends. The trees, patient, responded to the touch of the air, and each branch that moved seemed to hold an ancient story. Lucca imagined that maybe the trees kept memories of every wind that had ever visited them, and that each whisper was a memory being retold. A leaf brushed against the window, making a soft sound, almost a sh. Lucca smiled and answered softly, as if speaking to the wind. All right, I'm listening. And in that instant, the sound of the trees stopped being noise and became company. Blue lay down again, his muzzle resting on his paws, eyes almost closing. The room smelled of afternoon, and the sound outside seemed to cradle everything: time, sleep, soul. It was as if the wind was saying through the trees, "Stay calm. I'll keep blowing for you." Suddenly, the sound of the trees changed. The wind, which until then had only whispered, raised its voice. It moved firmly through the yard, lifting the leaves that slept on the ground, spinning them in the air as if reminding them they were born to dance. The curtain moved, and the cold air entered the room with a living, almost human presence. Lucca felt the wind touch his face. It wasn't harsh. It was a touch full of intention, like someone arriving and saying, "Wake up, there's beauty even in movement." The boy closed his eyes, letting the air pass through his hair, and for a moment, he felt the wind pass not only through the room but through something inside him. It was as if it carried away small weights he hadn't known he was holding. Blue lifted his head, alert, his ears moving like tiny antennas. By instinct, he took 2 steps to the window and sniffed the air. The breeze brought the smell of wet earth, of living leaves, and the sweet aroma of the flowers that still resisted in the garden. He sighed, as if the wind had touched him too. Outside, the leaves rose high, spinning in spirals, and then returned to the ground, unhurried. Lucca watched in silence, a curious glow in his eyes. He realized that even when the wind seemed strong, there was gentleness in its force, a kind of invisible care. The sound of the world became fuller, wider, as if everything was breathing at the same time. The boy rested his head on the window ledge, and the wind, satisfied, seemed to calm down. The house returned to its peaceful rhythm, but something inside him had changed. Maybe it was the simple reminder that not everything the wind moves is meant to be destroyed. Sometimes it's just the universe rearranging what needs to find its place. After the gust, the yard looked different. The leaves had changed places. Some had flown far away. Others clung to the branches, stubborn, as if they weren't ready to go. Lucca watched this silent dance and wondered why some leaves let go so easily while others insisted on staying. Maybe he thought leaves were a little like people. Blue walked to the door and looked outside, curious about the beautiful mess the wind had left behind. The ground was covered in colors, shades of copper, gold, and rust blended like a mosaic. Lucca opened the door slowly, and the cold air touched his face. For a moment, The world seemed still. Only the leaves moved, as if still searching for their place in time. The boy picked up a leaf caught on the step. It was light, almost weightless, but its surface carried fine veins, paths the wind had drawn with patience. He ran his finger over them, feeling the rough and delicate texture at once. And he thought that maybe the wind didn't take things away. It only helped them find where they belonged. Blue came closer, his nose brushing the boy's hand, and the leaf moved gently. Lucca smiled. There was something beautiful in that small gesture. The wind was still there, invisible, caring for everything without needing to be seen. Up above, a final leaf swayed, hanging by a thread. It resisted, but the branch was already letting it go, understanding that the time to stay had ended. And Lucca understood. Some things don't leave because they want to, but because they need to continue their path elsewhere. In the room, the light of late afternoon entered through the gaps in the curtain, drawing golden stripes across the floor. The calmer wind now made the pages of the diary move, as if wanting to be read. Lucca sat at the table, opened the notebook, and looked at the blank page, that space that always seems to wait for something the heart doesn't yet know how to say. Blue lay nearby, silent, with the curious and tender look of someone who understands that moment is sacred. The pen slipped from the boy's fingers, and for a while, he just stared. He didn't know exactly what to write. The world outside still danced between motion and pause, and within him, there was also a breeze, a mix of lightness and longing. Then, without thinking much, he began to write. The wind doesn't take everything. It only takes what is already learned to return. When he finished the sentence, Lucca set the pen down slowly. He sat there, looking at the words as if seeing the reflection of his own soul in an old mirror. Blue lifted his head, and the sound of the wind filled the silence between them. It was a beautiful silence, full of presence. The boy ran his fingers over the freshly written line, feeling the texture of the still wet ink. And he realized that writing was a way of keeping what the wind said. Some things get lost in the air, but when they turn into words, they learn to stay. Outside, a leaf passed through the open window and landed on the diary, as if wanting to sign along with him. Lucca smiled. The wind had answered. While the wind played with the leaves in the yard, an old memory drifted lightly through Lucca's mind, as light as the breath that moves the air. He saw himself as a child, running among the trees with his grandfather. The leaves swirled around them, and the man, wearing a worn hat and a serene smile, blew one into the air and said, "Look, Lucca, they only fly because they trust the wind." Back then, the boy laughed without understanding. He thought his grandfather was just playing, trying to make the wind seem magical. But now, sitting by the window, he realized that the phrase was deeper than it seemed. The leaves trusted because they didn't try to control the path. They simply let themselves be carried. And maybe that was what his grandfather had been trying to teach all along, that the secret of lightness is to trust what you cannot hold. The wind blew stronger for a moment, as if confirming the thought. Blue raised his head, looked at the boy, and for a brief moment seemed to listen too. Lucca smiled, his heart warm and calm. It was curious how the wind, the same one from so many years ago, still knew how to find its way back. And in that instant, he was certain. Memories are also leaves. They return whenever the wind calls them by name. A solitary leaf clung to the window. The wind made its way a few times until, overcoming the distance, it entered the room, spinning in the air as if searching for a place to land. It fell on the wooden floor, sliding to Lucca's feet. Blue lifted his head, curious, following the small spectacle with calm, attentive eyes. Lucca bent down and picked up the leaf gently, as if holding something alive. It was small, in a tone between yellow and copper, and its edges still carried a faint scent of sun. Observing it closely, he noticed that the veins running through it were as thin as the lines of a map, perhaps the map of all the winds that had ever touched it. There was something in them that told stories without needing words. By instinct, the boy brought the leaf to his lips and blew softly. The leaf spun in spirals in the air, reflecting the soft light of the lamp before landing on the open diary. Blue followed it with his eyes until the very end, then lay down again, satisfied with the simple ending of that dance. Lucca smiled. It felt as if the wind had sent a message, a reminder that even what falls can go on dancing. He left the leaf there, quiet, on the diary, and for a moment the whole room seemed to bow in respect to that small presence. It was as if the world whispered in silence, "Nothing is ever lost when the heart learns to look slowly." The window remained open, and the wind came in soft waves, as if the room itself were breathing. The curtains moved slowly, touching the air with gentle, almost human gestures. The sound of the wind mixed with that of the leaves outside, and together they formed a melody with no beginning or end, only a continuous flow, like time itself. Blue opened his eyes for a moment, then went back to sleep, lulled by that invisible music. Lucca stood still, feeling the wind trace his skin, his face, his neck, his arms. It wasn't just a touch, it was a silent conversation. It felt as though the wind wanted to tell him something, and to hear it, he had to stay completely quiet. Each breath seemed to say, "Do not fear what changes, what moves is what keeps you alive." The boy took a deep breath and noticed he was inhaling and exhaling in the same rhythm as the curtains. It was as if, for a brief instant, he and the room were the same being. The wind inside and the wind outside meeting halfway. Everything felt lighter, simpler, more true. He looked at the diary on the table. The leaf the wind had brought earlier was still there, motionless, yet alive. It carried within it the same air that now embraced him. And Lucca understood that the wind doesn't just pass through things. It stays a little in them, like memory, like soul. Blue let out a deep sigh, and the sound echoed softly through the room. The wind accompanied it, moving in and out in perfect harmony, as if the world itself breathed along with them. Lucca closed his eyes and smiled. He realized that sometimes what we need is not to understand the wind, but to let it pass through us, clearing away what time has left covered in dust. The wind, content, seemed to settle. The room returned to a silence full of life, the kind that makes you hear even the sound of your own breathing. Lucca looked at the diary and at the leaf resting on it. For a moment he hesitated. It was so light, so beautiful, that it seemed to balance the whole world with the simple weight of its touch. Carefully, he picked it up and placed it between the pages of the notebook. He closed the diary slowly, as one closes a secret inside an embrace. The sound of paper meeting paper was brief, but deep. It felt like the sound of something being kept forever. Blue lifted his eyes for a second, as if understanding the importance of that small gesture. Outside, the wind began to blow again, but differently now. It no longer struck the windows. It merely passed, gentle, like a visitor saying goodbye with gratitude. Lucca pressed the diary to his chest and stayed like that for a while, feeling the warmth of his own body heat the notebook. He realized that in some way the leaf was now part of him, and the wind too. There was no sadness in keeping it, only peace. The leaf didn't stop being free for being there. It had simply found a new home. Lucca understood that keeping something isn't imprisoning it. It's recognizing that it was too beautiful to let slip away completely. Blue came closer, lay beside him, and sighed deeply. And in that simple sound, Lucca felt the confirmation of the universe. Light things also deserve to stay. Time seemed suspended. Outside, the sun began to lean, and the light crossed the room in golden lines. Every object took on a different color. The lamp looked warmer, the curtain more transparent, the diary older. It was as if the entire world was being painted slowly, first in tones of honey, then copper, then rose. Lucca watched the sky change color. The clouds, once white, turned peach, then lilac, then almost invisible. Blue, lying beside him, followed the movement of the shadows with lazy eyes, his body already half surrendered to rest. Outside, the wind continued to blow, but now it sounded different, soft, patient, as if it too were tired and wished to lie down for a while. The boy felt a sweet warmth in his chest, the kind of feeling that arrives when everything seems to fit. The leaves outside were still falling, but now without haste, as if they had learned the rhythm of the evening. Lucca thought that perhaps the afternoon knew what it was doing. It was teaching the world to slow down. The sun, low on the horizon, spread its final light over the closed diary. For a moment, the golden reflection made the cover glow, as if a small flame lived inside. Lucca ran his hand over it and smiled. That light wasn't just from the sun. It was the glow of what the heart understands, even when the day ends. Time began to move slower. The wind outside became only a distant whisper, like a song coming from the end of the street. Inside the room, everything was still. The curtain motionless, the lamp lit, the diary closed. Even the air seemed to have settled, filling every space with a peace that asked for no permission. Lucca lay down on the bed, feeling his body mold to the mattress. Blue moved closer, curling beside him, his muzzle resting against the boy's arm. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was as if time had forgotten them on purpose, and because of that, it gifted them that suspended instant. Blue's breathing was a small, steady sound, almost a metronome of calm. Lucas stared at the ceiling but was no longer thinking of anything. The leaves outside brushed gently against one another, as if whispering that the day had ended. And the whole world seemed to listen in silence to the sound of its own existence. The boy closed his eyes. Not because he was tired, but because he had learned the pleasure of simply being there between the wind and the stillness. Inside him, time stopped, and in that space between one thought and another, he felt something rare, the present, pure and whole, breathing with him. With his eyes closed, Lucca began to see what could not be seen. They weren't dreams yet. They were light thoughts, loose, carried gently by the wind. One smelled of old rain, another of his grandfather's laughter, another of Blue running through the yard. And all of them floated slowly, like leaves on a quiet lake. The boy realized that thinking could be like blowing. You release, and the wind does the rest. He didn't need to hold on to anything. not memories, not worries, not words. Each thought that dissolved in the air left a space of silence, and the silence, in turn, filled everything with peace. Blue breathed beside him, and each time he inhaled, the whole room seemed to expand a little more. Outside, the wind mingled with the sounds of the night. A branch tapped gently against the window, and the sound repeated in a hypnotic rhythm, almost a lullaby. The rustle of the leaves sounded like a conversation between dreams about to be born. And within that serene scene, Lucca felt that his thoughts didn't carry him away. They simply guided him to a lighter place. Then he thought one last thing before giving himself over to rest. If the wind knows the way, I don't need to be afraid of getting lost. And that thought, the simplest of all, was the one the wind chose to keep. Blue breathed in a rhythm so steady it seemed to converse with the silence. His small body rose and fell gently, following the light sound of the wind that still slipped through the cracks of the window. Now and then, his ears moved, reacting to a distant noise, perhaps the whisper of leaves, perhaps time itself. But soon they settled again, as if understanding that there was nothing in the world that required hurry anymore. Lucca, with half-closed eyes, watched the dog. The soft light of the lamp traced Blue's outline on the blanket, and the golden glow made his fur seem almost like an extension of the light. He looked like part of the room, a fragment of the peace that filled it. The boy smiled, a gesture so small it barely showed, but Blue wagged his tail as if he had felt it. The air was warm, and the room smelled of paper, wind, and affection. Lucas slowly stretched his hand and touched the dog's back. The gentle warmth he felt there was the same as what was inside him, a silent certainty that everything was right. Blue released a long, peaceful sigh, and the sound echoed like a whisper of gratitude. For a moment, time dissolved. It was only the boy, the dog, and the sound of the wind outside, three different forms of the same calm. Lucca closed his eyes, and Blue, as if he knew what to do, moved closer, touching him gently with his nose. And in that touch, there was a silent promise. You can sleep. I'll stay here. The wind began to blow again outside, lower, softer, almost like a secret. Between sleep and dream, Lucca heard that sound and remembered his grandfather's voice echoing within him. Only those who trust can fly. The phrase came clear, as if spoken at that very moment, carried by the same wind dancing among the leaves. He thought of all that the wind had done that day. It had knocked down leaves, moved curtains, spread scents, brought memories, and yet, never once Had it been cruel, the wind never destroys, it transforms. And perhaps that's why the leaves follow it without fear. Because they know, deep down, the wind only takes what is ready to go. Blue shifted slightly, changing position, and the sound of the blanket resembled the faint rustle of leaves being touched outside. Lucca smiled at the thought. Everything that breathes eventually learns the rhythm of the wind, even the heart. He placed a hand on his chest and felt the steady beat, strong enough to remind him he was alive, but soft enough not to wake the silence. Maybe the heart was a kind of wind trapped inside us, blown by something greater. And in that moment he realized, to trust is to allow life to pass through us without trying to hold it. The boy took a deep breath, and the cool air entered slowly, light and clean. Outside, the trees replied with a gentle rustle, almost a good night. And he understood that when the heart aligns with the wind, even silence begins to sing. The lamp cast a soft light over the table. The glow seemed to breathe, trembling in tones of gold and amber, reflecting against the window pane. The wind still passed outside, but now it sounded distant, a gentle echo, as if going to visit other places. Inside the room, the world was quiet, and everything seemed to have found its place. The diary rested closed upon the table. The fabric cover still held the warmth of Lucca's hands, and between its pages, the leaf slept too, silent, still. The boy looked at it and felt a different kind of peace, not the one that comes when something ends, but the one that appears when something finds meaning. The words written inside seemed still alive, as if the wind continued to whisper between the lines. Blue lifted his head, looked at the diary, then at the boy. A brief, knowing glance, like someone aware that the little book held more than ink. Lucca reached out and touched it with his fingertips. For a moment, the lamp lit both his hand and the cover, and he thought that maybe light itself was part of what was being kept there. Outside, the leaves brushed softly against one another in a serene rhythm. The wind, content, seemed to say, "What was light has learned to stay." Lucca left the diary where it was, rested his head on the pillow, and took a deep breath. And as the silence spread, the whole room seemed to close its eyes with him. The room now seemed smaller, not because it had shrunk, but because silence made it more intimate. The lamp's light was almost a whisper, gilding the air with tenderness. Blue slept beside Lucca, his body serene, his chest rising and falling like calm waves. Outside, the wind continued its work, rocking the trees and the whole world in the same rhythm. Lucca breathed slowly, and each breath felt like one step deeper into himself. His body, once awake, began to dissolve into calm. His eyelids grew heavy. The sound of the wind blended with the sound of his heartbeat, and time lost the need to exist. It was as if the universe had decided to stop just to witness that simple moment, the boy and the dog falling asleep together. The diary remained closed, keeping the leaf and the wind inside. And the room, now almost dark, smelled of paper, night, and rest. Blue released a small sigh, the kind of sound that feels like a thank you. Lucca heard it, even half asleep, and answered with a smile that faded before it could form. Outside, one last breeze passed, slower, softer, like a farewell. And after it, the whole world seemed to lie down too. The wind, the trees, the room, time itself. Everything slept. Everything, at last, rested in peace. The night was now complete. A fine rain fell with the sound of a secret, and the wind walked among the trees with slow, almost invisible steps. Inside, Lucas slept deeply, his body calm, his breathing gentle. Blue, curled up beside him, dreamed too, perhaps of dancing leaves, perhaps of the wind running through the yard. Then the wind slipped in through the half-open window, not to stir or awaken, only to watch. It touched Lucca's hair with the tenderness of gratitude and moved the curtains slightly, making shadows dance on the walls. The diary on the table opened on its own, as if recognizing the presence of the invisible visitor. The leaf inside shifted, almost imperceptibly, and a soft sound filled the air. It wasn't the sound of words, but Lucca, even in sleep, understood. The wind said, "Thank you for listening." It was such a light whisper it seemed to come from within him, not outside. And in that instant, the boy smiled in his sleep, a small, silent smile, like someone hearing something their heart had long awaited. The wind lingered there for a few seconds, watching the boy and the dog, then left, passing through the window with the same gentleness with which it had arrived. Outside, it joined the trees again, carrying with it only the sound of a breath. And the world, content, went back to sleep. The night was whole. The rain outside sang a soft refrain, and the wind, now calm, simply watched the world sleep. Inside the room, everything rested. Blue dreamed. The diary slept between its pages, and time breathed slowly. Lucca, surrendered to sleep, moved his lips without realizing, and in a whisper that seemed to belong to the wind itself, murmured, "That's all for today, dear diary." The phrase dissolved into the air, mixing with the sound of the rain, and lingered there, like a thread of invisible light the wind carefully kept. The room was calm. The lamp's glow faded little by little, and even the wind seemed to honor that silence. It was the end of a day and the beginning of peace. Outside, the world continued its rhythm. The trees still swayed. The leaves still danced in slow spirals, and the wind carried on light, gentle, full of stories to tell. But inside that house, everything had already been said, and the silence that remained was not emptiness, it was presence. And you, who stayed until the end, may close your eyes now. Take a deep breath. Feel the wind moving through you too, light, steady, serene. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe, and write in the comments what the wind taught you today. Sometimes a single word can calm someone who needs it right now. Until the next story, may the wind always blow in your favor.